I was listening to a very old recording, or 20 years old, I guess, of Swami Kriyananda. Some of you are new today. Swami Kriyananda is the founder of Ananda. He was a direct disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda, Kriyananda, Swamiji. He passed in 2013. I was listening to a very old recording of a very informal discussion he was having with what was the whole community at that time, which was at Ananda village, and we all fit in the living room of his dome. And I'll give you some of the subject as I go along here. In the early 80s, like 80, 81, 82, Ananda as an ashram and as a community under the leadership of Swamiji went through a certain crisis, which is Swamiji himself became rather fed up with our attitude. And he basically went to Hawaii and more or less said he wasn't coming back until we got our act together. It was slightly less dramatic than that, but not by much. Later on, he said, well, I'll back up even further. I came to Ananda in 1971 when all there was a very primitive retreat, which is now the meditation retreat, and a very primitive community, which is now Ananda Village. All of this is near Grass Valley, California. I'm going to even say something even stranger. Somebody told me recently that in Edgar Cayce's readings, Edgar Cayce was a psychic who read in the 40s and 50s. He went into trance. He was a very, very spiritual man, and all of his readings are recorded. In one of his readings, he said that a town called Grass Valley in California is going to be a center of resurrection after very hard times hit this country. It was given to me by a reliable source. I had never heard it in all this time. A little town no one has ever heard of. Those were his words. What? We'll see. So I moved to Ananda Village in 1971. I moved there because I had met Swami Kriyananda in Palo Alto, as it happened, in 1969. He personified everything I was trying to become, and it only made sense to me to be closer to where he was, which I did go, and I stayed as close as I could to him until he passed away. And now I still try, but there's no physical body to give a geographic center to it. And shortly after I arrived, the community went through one of its many crises. Swami Kriyananda held this vision of what this spiritual community could be, but as he said, you need people to have a community. You can have all the vision you want, but by very definition, you need people. So people came who had more or less understanding of what he was trying to do, and some of them had the capability of learning, and others were just passing through. And one of those crises came as I recall, in the winter of 71 when I was there. And Swami had decided that he was given some money and he was going to put this building up in a certain place. And other people did not want the building in that place, and they didn't want him to be telling them what to do, and it was a whole big thing. So everybody gathers together in this very dim, lighted place in the cold winter, and Swami Kriyananda sits like this, which he would on occasion, and said, I seldom speak strongly about what this community should do, but when I do speak, I expect to be listened to. And he said, and if you don't want to do it the way I want to when I put my thoughts out like this, he said, I'll just leave. I just got there. He's about to leave. I just go into a kind of a panic mode, which was my MO anyway. And then this rest of this group, they just start talking as if he hadn't spoken, and they start talking about all the reasons why they don't want the building there, why nobody should dictate to anybody, just on and on and on and on like this. Finally, I'm not sure if I actually did this, but this is what I remember. I remember kind of perking up like this, and in a voice extremely high-pitched and very fast said, didn't you hear him? He said he was going to leave! Just like that, which I didn't understand what was really happening in the room, and I didn't understand that sometimes people who are quite supportive of Swami would just kind of wait, and the only way I can say it is to wait to see how he would play it. Just instead of diving in, they would just sort of wait to see how the energy was going. But my panic response triggered more people to kind of get on his side. And actually, at the end, about 25 people walked out of the room and left the community, which was necessary. I mean, they weren't bad people. They just had other ideas. You know, Ananda had a certain destiny, and they had another destiny, and we crossed, but we didn't stay together. But later I said to Swami, how could you do that like this? And he said, oh, Asha, I would never have said that if I didn't know I had enough people on my side. You know, just like that. So every 4 or 5 years, actually, of all the years that I was with Ananda, something would happen that would force everyone to a more mature understanding. Swamiji was a masterful leader in terms of awakening within us our own potential, but at a speed that didn't totally freak us out. So just a little bit at a time, and moments like that where you have to really stop and think, wow, what is important to me? Is it my concept of architecture and where the building should go? Or am I really here to learn an entirely new reality? I mean, this is the essence of the reading that we have today. No man can see God, but what they're saying is what we call ourselves is insufficient. And it's one of the more amazing to contemplate realities about the spiritual path. We get on the spiritual path, if we're serious about it, because some part of us knows that we're absolutely miserable. No matter how cheerful everything is going, there is this desperate inner drive to find something that won't slip through our fingers. And we know that we don't already have it. And then we get engaged in the spiritual path, and we're constantly asked to expand beyond what we already know. And with just the fiercest stupidity, we cling to what we already know, like this, and forgetting that that's the whole point. The whole point is it's inadequate. I remember the author of the book, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, who became a sort of, I don't even know if he's still alive, but he, in the course of things, when that book came out, however many years ago, he would speak. And one of the wonderful aphorisms, he was terrific at aphorisms, he said, if you defend your delusions, the reward for that is you get to keep them. You know, just like, yeah, that is what happens, isn't it? So Ananda was moving through one of its cycles about 1980, and Swamiji felt that we really did not understand how to draw spiritual inspiration. And he said people were beginning to think of him, as he put it, and he was the only direct disciple of Master among us, what to speak of having decades longer on the path than most of us. And there he was, than all of us, and there he was. He said, I began to feel like you treated me as if it was your right to get inspiration from me. And it was my job to give it to you. And, you know, if I so much as took a day off, somehow I was letting you down. And he said, this is not a mature relationship. And he said it wasn't working for him, and he really didn't think it was working for us. So he left. He went to Hawaii. I think from where you went with him, didn't you? Yeah, I'm looking at you and I can see you smiling. But he went off for a while and he just basically left it to us to figure it out. So now this was what I was reviewing was 4 or 5 years later, and he was just talking about the fact that we did rise to the occasion and we kind of woke up from a kind of stupor. And he began to explain to us, you know, the highest relationship with the divine is reciprocal. All relationships, everything that happens on the highest level is imitated in the world that we know. And in fact, this is the hardest thing also for us to understand. This is an exercise that we're doing here. This is like we're always rehearsing for the real performance. And we're always rehearsing how to be loving and kind and friendly and giving and selfless and dynamic and wonderful, so that we can learn those qualities, so finally we can have that relationship with the infinite, which is really with our own self. But we don't have it now because we're so busy protecting our smallness. So we get lots of chances. So everything that happens here explains to us what happens on a higher level. How well do relationships work when all you're thinking about is what can you give me? I mean, how well does it work when you think what I'm entitled to, what I need? And how much better does it work when there's a flow of energy, just a perfect flow of energy. A friend of mine, I'll say her name, Durga. She's so sweet as a person, and some of you know her, but she had ovarian cancer at one point, maybe 15 years ago. And she had to have an operation, and when she had to recuperate, she went to stay at Ananda village. She went to stay in somebody else's house so that this woman could cook for her and take care of her, and I went up also to help. Well, the woman who was hosting her was very protective of her and put out a notice to the whole community that said, she needs to rest, don't bother her, like this. And the way that house was set up, the kitchen had a back door, and then there was a front door, and then Durga was on the other side, like this. And all day long, that front door kept opening and closing. And before she could get there to stop them, people were slipping into Durga's room. And she was very annoyed. She was she was going to go tell them what for. And I said, Durga makes everyone in the world feel that they're a special friend of hers. And I count myself among them. And every single one of those people thinks, oh, it doesn't apply to them. She would want to see me. And I said, you know what? It's true. I mean, just think of that. She's a specific example, and she's far away, so she doesn't have to be, she'd be mortified. She will be mortified when she hears that I said this. But it's such a beautiful example. Swami Kriyananda, he was everyone's friend. I was in situations, I remember one in particular, in 2001 it was, when Ananda was embroiled in this litigation with Self-Realization Fellowship, which is a whole amazing drama that's written up in a book called The Fight for Religious Freedom. Our attorney wrote the book. And at one point it came to us that we really ought to expose what the SRF was doing to its own members by going to their convocation in Los Angeles, in which 5,000 people came from around the world, and we would march around on the sidewalk with signs, and we would pass out literature. This is not done in the best spiritual circles. But we were, I don't know, it felt like the right thing to do. That's the only thing I can say. And so this movement started from here, and some of you were all part of that. And there was what I can only call global outrage at the mere idea that we would do it. Ananda being what it is, even people who opposed it gave us our right to do it, recognized that we would have to do it in the name of everyone, whether they liked it or not. But a lot of people appealed to Swami Kriyananda to try to get us not to, like this. And he took this position of fantastic neutrality without ever making anyone feel that they were wrong. And he had this wonderful phrase when he would get calls from all over, do you know what they're thinking of doing? Which he knew perfectly well because we were telling him. And they would explain why we absolutely couldn't do that. And Swami would say, I understand why you feel that way. Isn't that brilliant? And he really did. He always understood why people felt the way they felt. That neither endorses it nor rejects it. It just says, my friendship for you, I know who you are, and I love you anyway. Now isn't that, think about it, alone in your own heart, isn't that what everyone is longing for? We want to be seen, we want to be understood, and after all of that, after all the barriers are taken down, we want to be loved completely. The extraordinary thing, all the scriptures tell us and all the masters say, is that we are. How do we not know this? There's in the Beatitudes, Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." We have this idea, we don't think about God as this individual form. We hardly even know what it is that we're saying. And this whole extended commentary is all about that. What is it really? What is it that we can't understand? But somehow a piece of us knows. And Jesus says, if the heart is perfectly pure, then the vision also becomes pure with it. And in other places, Swami says it just like this. And he suggests it to us as a meditation. I'll go back just a little bit. I'll go back very, very far in my own life to when I was a very small child. My sister wasn't born. She's a few years younger than I, so I was very small. My brother, who was an incredible tease all the time. We were in the back seat of the car before seat belts, and something happened, and it was probably his fault, but I couldn't prove that. But in any case, from the front seat, now I see it as an adult, parents just have had enough. And my mother turned around and spoke very sternly. She was a lovely person. It wasn't that it was inappropriate. She spoke very sternly to me. I didn't like it. I can remember, how you feel when someone hurts your feelings. If you're 2 years old or 100 years old, it still feels the same, doesn't it? She hurt my feelings. And I remembered how much I disliked that. Just that incredible feeling of absolute vulnerability. And there was nothing much I could do. There was no external thing. You're a child. You don't have any power. They pick you up and move you from spot to spot. You just can't do anything on your own. But I remember curling up on the floor of the back seat with my ear to the hump that was there at that time, listening to the tires like this. And being very conscious of the fact that I existed simultaneously on a level that was beyond reach of any pain. I'm not talking about psychological dissociation or anything like that. It was far different than that. It was a carried over memory. I knew that Satchidananda, ever existent, ever conscious, ever knew bliss, was somewhere there. And all I had to do was I remember thinking of it like this. I just had to move farther and farther back from this world. And then eventually I would find it, which I did. I just eventually found it. I hardly went into an ecstatic state. But the pain didn't exist on a different level. And what Swamiji talks about is he talks about meditating, going back, in, up, however you want. The words don't really mean anything. Expanding beyond the place that we usually call ourselves. And finding that place which is always there, of which this is just shadow and light. How many times do the masters tell us? Masters' poem Samadhi, vanished the veils of light and shade, lifted every vapor of sorrow. It's just gone away. And it's still happening like this, but we also exist on a level so far beyond it. And all we're doing here is practicing. And purity isn't finally, with our willpower, getting it together, so we always have the right attitude. It's recognizing that none of that has anything to do with us. That on this level, it'll always just keep happening. It'll always just keep happening. But there's someplace else where we can live. Now, going just to tie the threads together to that conversation with Swamiji when he was talking about how we relate to him. People, it was very free. Swamiji would conduct these very free conversations, lots of laughter, lots of jokes, everybody feeling quite confident, comfortable just to say. He was just helping us work things out. And someone was saying how out of consideration for Swamiji, they never even spoke to him because they didn't really want to be one of those people who was just taking energy from him. And she was presenting it as if, wasn't that a nice way to feel? Swami, he was very interesting. He came right in differently. And he told us this story of himself with Anandamoyi Ma. Anandamayi Ma, the joy-permeated mother that Master talks about in Autobiography of a Yogi. Swami was in India from 1958 to 1962, and she died in 82, so he saw her then and afterwards. But he spent a lot of time with her during those years, and she pulled him very, very close. In fact, she said, "Thousands of souls have come before this body, and none has drawn from me as you have done." So Swami said also that he was able to behave with Anandamayi Ma with a kind of freedom he never was able to express to Master, because he was 22 when he came to Master, and he was 26 when Master died. And he said he was always in such awe of him that he could never be himself. And by the time he met Ma a number of years later, 10 years later, he understood more. And so they had a very close relationship. So Swamiji tells this story. He said one of the monks at Mount Washington, Brother Turiyananda, had asked Swamiji to bring something back from Ma that she had touched so he could have it as a spiritual relic, because there was no chance of him coming to India. So Swami says to Ma, there's a monk, Brother Turiyananda, he would like something of yours. Perhaps you have a handkerchief or something like that. And she seems very willing and starts to speak to one of her attendants to get something for him. Then it occurs to Swamiji that he hasn't asked for anything for himself. And so he says very sweetly, "Perhaps you could make it 2?" And he said, Ma immediately knew. And then this discussion ensues where she said, "Why didn't you ask?" He said, "Well, I didn't want to trouble you." And she looked at him and she said, how can you trouble me? She said, "I'm your very own." And then Swami was saying to us, he said, when there is true love, he said, you can ask for everything and there's no presumption involved. Because once there is true love, there's no separation. And everything, that's what Ma said, I would give you everything. If just ask, I will give you everything. Like that. And what he began to realize, and what he was explaining to us, what I began to realize listening, is it's the impurity of our hearts that makes us think that God doesn't want to give to us, that our friends don't love us, that our teacher is reluctant, that we've displeased. That's the impurity. It's not that we've actually done anything wrong. The only thing we've done wrong is we don't know how much we are loved. And we hesitate. We're always hesitating. Oh, what if, what if, what if? There was Durga. She had made everyone feel, of course she would want to see me. And they just streamed in the door one after another, and she welcomed every single one of them. Now, that's how we need to feel with God and Guru. Of course he wants to see me. Of course he wants to give me everything. Am I not his own? We have each other to practice on. We don't have Master in the body or Swami in the body anymore, or Anandamayi Ma. They've all gone. But we have each other. And we have that power of God in one another. Everybody's asking in these times, people feel so turbulent. What can I do? What can I do? Really, it's so simple. There's no question. Love. And I don't mean love with sentiment and emotionalism. I mean that love that lives in the divine and sees the divine in all. Now that's heroic. That's the purity that we're looking for, that never doubts our own connection with God, God's connection with us, and through that, our unity with everyone. That's the world we're meant to bring in. It's not about who's the president or who's in charge or whether the whole thing blows up in nuclear war. Because as Swamiji said, if we all go out in one big blast or dribble out over the next century, he said in 100 years we'll all be gone. And in the astral world it doesn't make any difference, but you will still have your consciousness. I will still have my consciousness. That is what matters. Live in the light, live in the love, and give that to all. God bless you.